Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
Dad's Army.
Everybody ready?
Stand back. It's stalking practice for Captain Mannering.
Bang.
Laughter for Starters, Saturday evening on BBC One.
Comedians have a tough job, don't they? You think being funny in front of hundreds, thousands, millions of people is easy? Think again. Being a comedian is hard enough. Try being funny live on television, where your reach will often exceed millions of viewers. For decades now, ever since the earliest days of the medium, comedians have used television to their advantage, with tons upon tons of careers getting their big break from appearing on comedy panel shows, sketch shows, or even appearing in a homegrown sitcom. But it isn't all laughs, and two moments in particular come to mind. One featuring a comedian who was at their peak in the 80s and 90s, and one who came from the early days of TV, but met perhaps the most tragic ending. Let's start with the former. Enter Bobby Davro. Born Robert Christopher Nankivell, Bobby Davro would first become known to audiences in the early 1980s, but his big break would come by appearing on Live from Her Majesty's, an extremely popular variety show produced by London Weekend Television. With regular viewership over 10 million, it was the ideal place for new talent to flourish and for older talent to remind audiences why they'd become so beloved in the first place. For Bobby, it helped his career skyrocket. But keep in mind, we'll be returning to Live from Her Majesty's for more somber reasons a bit later on.
Turn the pages of Bobby Davro's TV Annual.
Throughout the 1980s, Bobby Davro would front many a Saturday night programme for ITV. This included Bobby Davro on the Box, Bobby Davro's TV Annual, and Bobby Davro's TV Weekly. This was arguably the peak though, as by the time the 1990s came in, Bobby's style of comedy and overall popularity began to dip. In an apparent change of tactic, Davro would shift from the various regions of the ITV network over to the BBC, to appear on some of their comedy offerings. One such offering was Public Enemy No. 1.
At 6:20, Bobby Davro is one man and his dog.
From what I can gather, this short-lived series was all about pranks. Members of the public were the victims, often unknowingly agreeing to take part in said pranks, with Bobby Davro as the host in the studio. Alongside were various celebrities who would have to try and guess the outcome of these pranks. Some skits would also be performed in the studio, including one last-minute gag that ended with disastrous results. Though never broadcast on TV, the time-coded footage of this incident survives, as it was apparently used after the fact in various BBC training videos. What you're about to see was allegedly a last-minute idea, one that I'm sure you'll agree should have been left out. Awful stuff, but it could have been even worse than that. Whilst in the stocks, Bobby isn't able to properly move his hands or face as he falls forward. And keep in mind, if falling flat on your face isn't bad enough, try doing it on the concrete floor of a BBC studio. Thankfully, Bobby looked to be alright, though from his own recollection, his chin had split open as a result of the fall. When taken to hospital, the good news was that he amazingly hadn't broken his nose or any of his teeth. His neck, however, had suffered some kind of damage, including whiplash, but nothing fundamentally life-changing. But back to the incident at hand, how on earth did this happen? Remember how I said this was supposedly a last-minute gag? Well, when you look into all the factors, it shows. The stocks prop that was used was apparently bought in by the prop buyer, as opposed to being made in-house, which checks out if this was truly a last-minute idea. The stocks were plonked onto the set of Public Enemy No. 1, as opposed to being a purpose-built part of the set. Because of this, the prop hadn't been vertically secured, so if Bobby lost balance, there would be nothing supporting him. So if Bobby lost balance, there would be nothing stopping him, and the entire stocks prop toppling over with him, which is exactly what happened. This is a damning blow to the BBC's health and safety record, which if you're a regular viewer here, you'll know it was staggeringly bad in the 1980s. Accidents do happen, of course they do, but considering the prop wasn't locked down and yet they still went ahead and filmed this skit, shows that for the sake of time and getting material in the can, a glaring safety factor was seemingly overlooked. Bobby Davro wouldn't be the only victim of said negligence on Public Enemy No. 1. as one of the celebrity guests would be Anthea Turner, herself a victim of a horrific accident whilst working on a BBC show. 7 episodes of Public Enemy No. 1 were ultimately transmitted in the autumn of 1992, and supposedly, the ratings weren't that good. Bobby Davro's popularity continued to decline from where it was in the 80s, but he remained a firm favourite to many, appearing extensively in various theatre shows and occasionally popping back up on TV. Although more than 30 years after this awful accident, he still occasionally suffers from neck pain, a result of the severe whiplash that he got as he slammed against the concrete floor. But whilst this had a relatively happy ending, the fate of our next comedian is the complete opposite. Enter Tommy Cooper. Born in Caerphilly, Wales in 1921, from an early age it seemed that young Tommy was destined for a life of performance. After receiving a magic set as a boy, Cooper became fascinated with the art of magic, and as an adult would join the renowned Magic Circle. You may recognise Tommy from his iconic look, at 6 foot 4 inches tall, wearing a red fez atop his head. Supposedly, whilst performing a sketch in Cairo, Egypt during his military days, having forgotten a pith helmet prop, Tommy reached out, grabbed a waiter's fez and stuck it on his bonce, to great laughs from the crowd. The fez would become the calling card of this look for the rest of his life. After leaving the military in the late 1940s, Tommy fully turned to a performing career, including some stints on the newly relaunched BBC television service. Appearing on talent show New to You in 1948, Tommy would appear to those few who had telly at the time, in further shows such as Comedy Capers and It's Magic. By the time independent television came along, in 1955, Tommy began fronting his own programmes. These included Cooper, or Life with Tommy, for Associated Rediffusion, and Cooper's Capers for ATV. As more and more Brits acquired television throughout the 50s and 60s, they became more familiar with the tall Welshman with his big smile and red fez. Popularity grew thanks to It's Tommy Cooper, a show made for the recently launched London Weekend Television. And from 1973 until 1980, Tommy would front multiple shows for Thames Television, becoming not only one of the most recognisable comedians in the UK, but around the world too. However, through all of this success, there was an undercurrent of darkness behind the funny man persona. Throughout the 1970s, as Tommy's fame grew, so did his consumption of alcohol. His manager, Miff Ferry, had noted that Tommy's wife, Gwen, had told him she'd had enough of Cooper's drinking and his antics, which included alleged physical abuse. The booze had also begun to affect his professional career as well as his personal life. Clubs would complain that Tommy would appear late, and in some cases, not appear at all. Either that, or he'd rush through his set as quickly as possible, with one club at Southend only getting to experience the fez-wearing comic for a mere 5 minutes before he walked off. All this came to a fore in 1977, when Tommy would suffer a heart attack live on stage whilst performing in Rome, Italy. Doctors concluded that it was caused by chronic alcoholism, without doubt. Smoking copious amounts of cigars a day didn't help either. Unabated, Cooper would continue to hit the bottle, with more incidents in his personal and professional life cropping up, including bouts of tantrums with production crews, as well as more alleged physical abuse towards the women in his life. Unbeknownst to most of the public, his career continued, including a strong Royal Variety performance in 1977 and an appearance with Michael Parkinson in 1979. Whilst his time with Parky was generally full of laughs, an incident here nearly cost the host his life. Setting Michael up for a stunt involving a guillotine, somehow Tommy had forgotten to set the safety catch on the device. At the last moment, a floor manager rushed in and flicked the switch, saving Michael Parkinson from some serious injury, or even something far worse.
My wife said to me, "Are you a man or a mouse?"
By the time the 80s came around, matters had reached a breaking point. Due to his excessive drinking and increasingly unprofessional behaviour, Thames Television, the company that had given him show after show for years, refused to do so again. This didn't stop Tommy from appearing on other programmes, including Thames ones, but during a live performance in 1984, an incident occurred that no one, not even Tommy himself, could have predicted. Live from Her Majesty's was a variety show that ran from 1983 to 1988. Remember I mentioned it earlier, as it's where Bobby Davro got his big break into the TV comedy scene. The programme was immensely popular, with viewership frequently over 10 million, so it seemed like the prime place for someone like Tommy Cooper to maintain his decades-long popularity and gain new fans as well. His appearance fell on April the 15th, 1984, as part of the second series, and things quickly went wrong. On stage, an assistant helped Tommy don a cloak, the idea being that the host of the programme, Jimmy Tarbuck, would pass him various props from behind the curtain, but making it look like to the audience that Tommy was pulling them miraculously from the cloak. After thanking his assistant, this happens. Now, for hopefully very obvious reasons, I'm not going to show the remainder of the clip. But this is what happened. Tommy had suffered yet another heart attack. But unlike the incident in Rome 7 years prior, this show was being broadcast live, with 12 million viewers watching on. If you've seen the clip, you'll hear the audience bursting into fits of laughter as Cooper falls back against the curtain. You may think this distasteful, but they merely thought this was part of the act. Throughout his career, one of Tommy's most well-known bits was letting the audience believe his magic tricks, or general setup, had gone wrong. The more things appeared to crash and burn, the louder the audience would laugh.
I should have additional empty cloth, 4 live ducks. Oh! I got away again.
And on this night at Her Majesty's Theatre, this seemed to be no exception. But what they didn't realise is that this heart attack was fatal. A few minutes after collapsing, Tommy Cooper was dead. After a very long period of silence on stage, members of the crew, and indeed the audience, began to suss out that not all was well. One of the producers asked Tommy's son, who was in the wings, if this fall was part of the act. When he confirmed that it wasn't, everyone needed to act fast. The director cued the orchestra to play music, and an early commercial break was called. Perplexed viewers at home would have blank television screens for several seconds, due to LWT contacting all the regional stations, showing the programme to start transmitting advertisements. A choice was needed here, as this was a live programme. Either the remainder of the show be called off, or they continue on. The latter option was chosen. Dustin G and Les Dennis came out to perform to the crowd, with very limited space, as behind the curtains, efforts were being frantically made to revive Cooper, whose body was still on stage. During a performance from Howard Keel, Tommy's body was finally removed from the stage, and he was rushed to hospital, but was pronounced dead on arrival. The one-time highest-paid comedian in the UK, who had maintained his popularity for nearly 4 decades, was gone. He was 63 years old.
He's left a gap, Ernie, hasn't he?
We shall miss him very much, and with all the trouble we have in the world today, we need them all.
The news was confirmed the following day on all of the major news programmes. The death had come as a shock to many, but after years of rampant alcoholism and various other health problems, medical professionals could hardly call it a surprise. Losing your life whilst performing can be heartbreaking enough, but for it to happen whilst 12 million people at home are watching too, it's unfathomable. He was a flawed man, absolutely. The constant drinking, the continued allegations of physical abuse against the women in his life, which permeate his legacy even to this day. But when looking back through history, from the late 1940s up until his death in 1984, he made people laugh. Scores of them. Does that excuse any of the bad things he's done? No. But from an entertainment standpoint, his style would influence future comedians for generations, and even today he's fondly remembered and looked back on by millions. For when they saw the tall man in the fez pop on their screens, they knew that the laughs would come thick and fast.
Well, I'd just like to say to the studio audience, there's a little saying, although it's nice to be important, it's more important to be nice. It's true, isn't it?
Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Bruce Danton, Derek Chambers, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, Liam Demain, AJ Mac 200017, Deck, Jen, Traffy, Tim Ripley, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Ted Elliott, Marnanel Thurman, John Wakefield, Kieran Bolton, 40-something Manchild, Jerry Ralph, John McLeod, Subs Khan, Saint Rocket 9, James Wallace, and Ben, our AMTV staff members.